Diversity breeds innovation. It breeds creativity, you know? And so that's just something that I personally value. I'll just share, there's one other quote that I totally love, that I say all the time. And it's this, and it's that all the musicians in an orchestra may make beautiful music alone, but none of them can produce a symphony without their combined efforts.
Every single one of us is a leader and could be a leader.
It started with a local coalition in our county.
Strategies you know, but stories you don't.
Data is the currency of prevention.
We want to reduce the negative, and we want to promote the positive.
Collaboration is the only way to move the prevention needle.
About connecting the research with the practitioner.
Put something out there that was kind of off the wall and create a community of prevention.
It's a passion, it's a real love to try to help make our world a little bit better, a little bit happier, small pieces at a time.
It's said an overnight success takes 16 years.
If we didn't plan for the change, but if we didn't help orchestrate it, then change is going to be upon us.
When it comes to the spiff, slow is smooth and smooth is fast, because the real power is in the process.
Ultimately, all of us want success in the work we're doing. We don't want to do mindless work. Proactive, participatory planning promotes positive, preventive progress.
This is the Mid-America PTTC podcast, where we believe prevention is better together, and together we are stronger. I'm your host, Dave Clausen. I'm the director of the Mid-America Prevention Technology Transfer Center, and this is episode 41. Today, I had the wonderful opportunity to connect and chat with my dear friend and colleague, Nicoles Augustine. And we really dove in to talk about how we have a number of buzzwords focused on diversity and cultural inclusion. And this topic should have always been at the forefront of our minds. In fact, when you really examine our prevention code of ethics and the strategic prevention framework, it's obvious that diversity, equity, and inclusion are embedded in our professional standards. So this episode really place a spotlight on the why and the how we can be intentional about improving health equity in our prevention practice. But before we get into the content, we'd like to thank our funder, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And a quick note, although funded by SAMHSA, the content of this recording does not necessarily reflect the views of SAMHSA. Without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right, I am excited to welcome Nicoles Augustine to the podcast. Now, I've known Nicole for a while now, coming up on like 2 years through our PTTC network. But yeah, Nicole, so glad to have you here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Been looking forward to this episode for about 3 months since we first started dancing around with this idea. But before we really get into the conversation, for our listeners, would you mind just sharing a little bit sort of about yourself and your background?
Sure, absolutely. So again, thank you so much, Dave. I'm Nicoles Augustine. It's such a pleasure to be here today. And my background, I didn't start in substance prevention. My background actually started in sociology just because I was really fascinated by how culture influences behavior, how from things like to what people eat and what they drink or what they listen to, how they dress, language. And it was through the discovery of sociology that I came across harm reduction really in college and underage drinking. And so that's where I first got my first introduction to substance prevention. I went on to get my MPH and then found myself doing prevention education about, specifically prevention education, probably a good early 2000s. So I've been doing this for a long time and I just love it. It's morphed over time as I've grown in my career. I do now more so consulting, training, TA, because I'm particularly interested in the development of prevention specialists. I am someone who my background and my history is the child of someone who had a substance use disorder, who actually dealt with a substance use disorder. And as a result of that, I was raised by a grandparent. And so for me, I think about the ways in which prevention can touch lives. I think about the prevention messages I never received. I grew up in a conservative state that doesn't talk about any of this stuff, you know? And so as I've gotten older and I realized the power of prevention and what can be avoided, right? When you have the skills and when you build the community and you create environmental strategies, that it's really become a personal mission of mine to really make sure that as prevention, our field grows. And so that's why I've shifted into more of the training and TA side of things, because I'm curious about the workforce development. How do we get more qualified prevention folks in the field? How do we do this work so we can create some real change in the world around substance misuse issues? So that's a little bit about who I am, a background, why I'm here, why I do, what I love about it. And I'm excited to be here and to talk with you today.
Oh, I can hear the passion in your voice, and I can see the passion in your intentionality about what you do and why you do it. Oh, absolutely love it. I could just ask questions and unpack your background. There's so
Oh my
much
God.
wealth
Yeah,
and knowledge there, but
totally.
I really just want to jump into a very specific conversation. Um, as I was exploring your website, there was a line that really just jumped out at me
Mhm.
and piqued my interest that I want to know more about that and really look at it with the lens of the prevention field.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm going to read it for our listeners so I don't goof it up.
Sure.
Diversity and inclusion is no longer a matter of just regulatory compliance or affirmative and social justice. It's wholesomely a business performance paradigm. I love that paradigm on the end of that. What brought that to be on your website? Tell me more about that. Where's that come from? Why is that
Yeah.
there?
You know, I appreciate, like, actually just hearing you read the sentence, I was like, yes. So, for me, this kind of wording this way started actually in 2020. 2020 was a challenging year for a lot of reasons. Uh, However, one of the things that really happened for me is I've always had an interest in diversity, equity, inclusion, disparity work. I mean, I studied sociology for the main reason of understanding why groups had differences in health outcomes for no other reason than things like race or geography or income. And so what happened in 2020 with COVID-19, even for us in prevention, is all of a sudden this spotlight got placed on the disparity issue in our country. And for me, as someone who's been studying this concept for a long time, I'm like, well, this has always been the case, like, okay. But neither here nor there, I actually think of it as a blessing because for the first time, we were having candid conversations. We were having conversations that were more than just a cultural competency training that I'm needing to take because I need CEUs for my credentialing. Okay, let's
Right.
be real. That's typically how most of us are getting this is I need to get my CEUs. I need to
Mhm.
research. How quickly can I get this, right? It's a checkbox.
Mhm.
Or it's something that your agency requires you to do. Again, it's still a checkbox. And so for me, what began to happen is in 2020, I started to be asked quite often. I did a lot of webinars on diversity, equity, inclusion. And because I'm so passionate about this topic, I've always taken this approach of this is not just hearing information to hear it. Like the whole purpose, the whole intention of why we even talk about cultural competency or diversity, equity, and inclusion is so that those things actually become topics that change behavior, that change operations in a business, that change how we do our prevention work in a community. And so for me, I think last year I made my own transition, that I didn't want to just be someone who did this work because it was a regulatory compliance or because it was, just affirmative action or social justice. It's like, woohoo, like my personal opinion is we have these social movements that people get behind. And then when it's over, you don't hear about it anymore. And so for me, it became bigger. And this started in 2020 for me. And I intentionally made this shift in my organization that I want to be the voice. I want to be the person who's getting us to think deeper than just this checkbox that we do. That if we really, really cared about the equity issues and the disparity issues in our communities, we would make this about the performance of our business, because prevention is a business.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We got money coming in and money going out, and people act like prevention is not a business. And so I began to shift how I think about prevention and say, okay, this is about performance. Because the truth is, businesses that prioritize diversity, that prioritize inclusion, perform better. And it just comes from the fact that diversity breeds innovation. It breeds creativity, and so that's just something that I personally value. I'll just share, there's one other quote that I totally, totally love. That I say all the time. And it's this, and it's that all the musicians in an orchestra may make beautiful music alone, but none of them can produce a symphony without their combined efforts. And I'm a musician at heart. So like things like a symphony, a band, where there's harmony, where there's diversity of sound. That's what I think about when I think of diversity, equity, inclusion. It's complexity now versus, one note when you're not really thinking more broadly about this. So that thank you for asking me that. I haven't had anyone ask me that before.
I'm just sitting here with that quote, just sitting with it for a minute, and thinking back to the times where music has hit my soul and really just you feel it. You don't just hear it. And I'm just kind of going through a play-by-play of my past with music, and I can't say it was just watching one person play an instrument or play just a note. It was that group effort.
It's true. It's the combination. That's what creates the shifting. Like, honestly, even as we're talking about this, I got to chill, just thinking about like what it truly means when we gather ourselves together. We operate from a space of community. We operate from a space of respecting diversity and differences, because you're just able to make a greater masterpiece when you combine those things together.
Absolutely. And so many different thoughts come to mind. I just want to talk about all of them. But for starters, you reminded me of, actually, it was a Simon Sinek little video clip where he talked about nonprofits and shifting the mindset to for-profit. The only thing is, instead of a traditional for-profit where you want to make dollars, it's our profit in the prevention field is impact. We are for impact. And it just, if you can shift your mindset, that's what we're trying to get more of, is that positive impact. Yes.
I agree. I'm so glad you said this, because the other thing that's happened for me is I've gotten really big on language. So I really struggle with using the word nonprofit to describe our work, because it is not without profit. So I'm glad you mentioned like the concept of impact being profit. But the truth is, there are also financial profits that come with this work of prevention. And so, I've been saying for a little bit, our field is a bit poverty minded, unfortunately. And so I like to really think about our work as the the language of it, like we are 501c3 entities. That's a tax code thing. We don't need to be thinking about that.
Right. Yeah.
That's for taxes. That's the
Mhm.
business side. That's what HR and all the other people, the execs are supposed to be worried about. Okay, we don't need to worry about that. That's a logistical administrative thing, right? And that and I think sometimes when we use words like, oh, we're a nonprofit, it gives this energy of we're small, we don't have great impact, we don't make money or create wealth in the world, right? And I'm like, but that's not actually true. That's not actually true. There's so many wonderful things that we do, and the return on investment for prevention is huge and multifold and continues for years and generations. So, it's interesting that he even mentioned that changing the mindset around nonprofit. And I think for me, it starts with the word. There's so much energy attached to the word nonprofit. Just saying it, people automatically think, oh, okay, well, that means there's no growth there. There's no success there. And that's actually not true. There are tons of like very, very successful 501c3 organizations.
I see what you did there.
You see what I did right there, right?
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Oh, goodness. So you also inspired another thought, and it was talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. It can be unfortunately falls into a check the box category or training. And it just reminded me that when you're looking at diversity and inclusion, that diversity, it's a state of being, and inclusion is the act of doing. And I
Yeah.
feel like we can get in that mindset where we don't separate out that and see that it's the act of doing is where the magic, the music is created, not the
Mm,
check the box, the state of being. And I kind of
I
feel like,
agree.
yeah, I feel like that resonates in line, like cultural competence makes it feel like a check the box.
Oh my God. That's what I don't like about that word, is
Hmm.
it feels totally like, okay, I'm competent. Boop.
Right.
Done. I'm finished. I did that already.
Right.
And, this space doesn't work that way. You're always learning, constantly learning. Oh my gosh. Like all the time. Our language change, our words change, culture shifts all the time. I mean, the reality is any of us, pick any age that you're at right now, you culturally have a different generational experience than your parents, than your grandparents, than the generation after you. Like culture is ever evolving. And so there can't be a checkbox, you know?
Absolutely. I agree. So, sort of building on that conversation of let's talk about the act of doing.
Mhm, mhm,
What does that look like when we talk about prevention? Cultural competence, that is at the heart of the SPIF. But if
mhm,
we change our language to the act of doing, what does that look
mhm.
like in prevention or with the strategic prevention framework?
Yeah. So this is a topic that I actually really love to talk about. And it's really bringing the strategic prevention framework or truly any sort of planning framework that you're using to life, the doing part of it, right? And so for me, like if you're taking an intentional thought around equity and disparity issues, that means from the very, very beginning of your planning activities, that question is on the table. You're looking at your data differently. You're looking at your community differently. You're really taking the time to understand where are the issues because they're not all over the place. A lot of times they are connected to particular geographies and zip codes. They're connected to particular areas of resource economically or even race, you know? And the truth is, if you're not thinking from this perspective, you don't look at your data that way. You do your YRBS, you do your pride, and then you just say, okay, 30% of students are XYZ, or 60% of youth are blah, 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 right? That's your needs assessment. Okay. And this is what we do. This is truly what we do. And my deal is we have to do more than that. The doing part truly to me is more than that. It's the further asking of the questions, the further looking at, okay, what are the demographics of this group? And I find any trends. Where are these folks coming from in our community? Is it just one pocket, just one area, all over? Until you really start to dig deep, it makes it challenging to truly understand the picture. And so for me, that right there, that's the base, because that springboards for everything else, right? Because we're all familiar how the strategic planning process works. Your assessment sets the stage for everything. It's like the pathway, essentially. And so for me, the reason why this doing part of how we do our planning should be so different is because depending on what you find out in your needs assessment, you might take a completely different route. Some of us have long-term relationships with community partners, with schools, with churches, with YMCAs, and those are great. I want us to begin to say, is this truly where I'm needing help? Or am I still maintaining this connection because it was easy to get? Because I know somebody. And that's great. But what if a different zip code is the area that has the greatest need? And we're pouring all our DFC funds or PFS funds or Block Grant funds into the connections that, oh, I've known this person forever, or we've worked with this community forever. And it may not necessarily line up and match with what the actual data is saying around the need. And so for me, I feel, the doing part is truly, truly making sure we're willing to shift our resources, shift our implementation strategies based upon what our data is saying about the disparities and the equity issues in the communities that we serve.
I was kind of reminded of actually both my time as a university police officer and actually my time as an Army infantryman in Iraq.
Oh, wow.
And one of the biggest lessons that I carried forward from Iraq to policing and now to prevention is the GOT method, the GOT approach, meaning get out of the truck. So in Iraq, we found ourselves, we were most successful when we got out of our trucks and we went out and just engaged with the community members. We talked to them, we got to know them, we built relationships with them. And once they knew and trusted that we were there to help, guess what? They then helped us too. But it was building that relationship and us going to them. And that same approach when I was a police officer, getting out of the squad car, going and talking to students on campus, talking to other folks across the campus in different departments. Great foundation building that relationship. But what I learned about what they do, the stressors of their lives, their jobs, their goals, their vision, their missions, helped me to better help them too. And I kind of, you just inspired that, reminded me of that approach. Like we as prevention leaders, we're all leaders, no matter if we're a volunteer on a coalition clear up to a state level, we're prevention leaders. We're trying to lead change in our communities and our systems. That even when it comes to assessment, get out there. You've got to go get that information. You've got to go meet the folks where they're at.
Yeah, that is so true. I like that. Get out the truck.
Yep.
Love it.
Get out the truck.
That's so true. And the interesting challenge, right, is getting out of the truck, out of our offices, right? Because a lot of us are, sitting in the comfort of our spaces and creating our ideas for community projects. And then we wonder why there isn't as much buy-in, right? And so I loved even the example you gave. It's like, even if you think about your experience, whether that is as a police officer or in the infantry, right? You have a mission that you're attempting to accomplish. And I loved what you said. It wasn't until you got out of the truck, engaged the community, had conversation, and guess what? It came alongside you.
Absolutely.
In fulfilling the mission. It's like magic, right?
Right?
And so, like, applying the same concept to our work in prevention, we have a mission, right? We do our work because we care. We're most of us are people who either have had personal experience with addiction or have family members who had personal experience with addiction. Most of us are here because it's hard work. And so we want to do good, right? And I think we forget that you've got to get out of the truck into the community and engage in conversation so that the community can be alongside you and support you
Mm-hmm.
and give you access,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that
Mm-hmm.
the mission can actually be accomplished. Because
Yes.
before then, it's not. You guys are in conflict with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I really love that example. Yeah.
The getting out of the truck works great when it comes to assessment, getting out and getting that information you need, coming alongside, and it will also help build your capacity, like you were saying, because you're coming alongside to help each other out.
Mm-hmm.
What
Mm-hmm.
does doing or the act of doing look like when you get to planning? How can we bring equity into planning?
Yeah. So to me, it's actually very, very similar. It's the same. You've got to have your community at the table. And actually, I would say, I'm going to probably say this every time. It's important, each single one.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
However, I would say in planning, it's extremely important because your community they're the folks who actually live where you're trying to create the change. And so the beautiful part about having the community engaged in the planning process is they can actually help you make sure it's going to be implemented correctly. Make sure you've thought about the best places to do the work, the best strategies to use, right? Based upon the community and based upon the cultural preferences and all those sorts of things. And so in planning, to me, it looks the same. It is actually making sure that the community is involved. And hopefully, if you are doing this in, some sort of order, if you will, um, the community was already involved in the assessment. And we know that doesn't happen as much. We have a tendency to use the community for our assessment data versus actively involving them in the assessment process.
Ooh, okay. You need to say that again because that is powerful.
So we have a tendency to use the community to gather our assessment data. We say, I have a survey, I need for you to fill it out. And then we bug them. How come you're going to do it? When are you going to do it? You know what I mean? We want data from the community. That's not involving in assessment. That's literally just using the community numbers, the community information. Whereas there really needs to be a shift. And every time I actually talk about what the shift really looks like, it makes people nervous because it completely changes what you do. It changes the timeline, the process. True engagement means the community actually even helps you develop the survey tool. Okay? Deliver the survey. And so when you start and analyze the data when it comes back, interpret, right? So when you really think about what it means to be truly equitable or really embedding the cultural competence as it's stated in SPIF, that means you have, even if it's a committee of community voices, diverse community voices that are with you in the process, that help you think about what questions are we trying to answer? What do we want to know? How do we answer them? Because I think sometimes we forget things like literacy level. Okay. That's another big one for me. And we create surveys that some of our community members can't even read or understand. And it makes it challenging for sure. So yeah, like to me, ideally you've got folks who helped you with assessment. So once you get to planning, I mean, you're still accessing the same folks. But if you're in planning right now, I would say, where's your focus group, your advisory crew from the community that you're attempting to serve, so they can give you real guidance about the strategies you're thinking about, what's going to work, new innovative ideas. That's the most beautiful part, right? It reminds me of the band and the diversity. you know, it's like when you think about if you're someone who builds music and builds sounds, you're taking multiple tracks and putting them on top of each other. And so adding more voices, bringing the community in, the diversity of voices just adds more depth and complexity to what you're able to accomplish.
And if you're a new listener, you may not have heard it, but in case you didn't know, prevention is better together. And together we are stronger. It really is so true. And whether it be working through the steps of the strategic prevention framework or any aspect of prevention, together is better. So you've gotten me thinking, and I would bet money that you've got our listeners thinking. Uh, what could you offer them as a next step or a first step, depending upon where they're at in their process, their journey?
Yeah. Well, I am a big proponent of self-reflection, self-awareness, and taking time to look in the mirror. So I always say the very first step is actually sitting with yourself and thinking about what am I doing, really looking at my own prevention practice when I get ready to do a prevention education program. Have I thought about the equity issues? Have I questioned anything about what I'm doing with the grant that I was hired to manage, And so to me, very, very first steps is that if anything of this conversation has sparked interest, take a moment for your own personal self-reflection, and really look at how are you contributing to the space of diversity and inclusion? Is it something you think about? Is it something your agency is talking about? And if not, do you have the courage to say something to your supervisor, to your director, to your organization about having these types of conversations and thinking about your service delivery different?
Excellent first step. Just the power of personal reflection, self-reflection. It sets that solid foundation to inspire, empower others for change. And one of the things, as far as me, one of the things I'm personally committed to doing is just keeping conversations going, starting conversations. And it might sound scary for some folks. You don't have to have all the answers. It can be something as simple as, having this conversation the other day and this thought came out, or this was shared and it just stuck with me.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make of it? Let's talk about
Mm-hmm.
it. It can be as easy as that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It really can.
Yeah. So true.
Yeah.
So true.
There are so many great takeaways, so much value that you've shared with us today. And it's very clear that it comes from your passion, your why, your purpose. And I've already seen the change that you've inspired through the PTTC network and through Rise Consultants. I'm excited to be alongside you on your journey. Can't wait to see what else you're going to be bringing and creating, the music you'll be sharing with this world. Absolutely.
Oh, that is beautiful. Thank you for that. Yes, thank you for that. I'm happy, honored, excited, just looking forward to using my time wisely. I think that's really what you're experiencing and witnessing right now is 2020 really shifted me energetically, to be thinking about my contribution to my field, my passion, the work. And so I'm excited to be using my energy for something that I care about.
Mm-hmm.
It gives me unlimited juice, and I'm excited about that.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of sort of unlimited juice and aligning, and it just made me think about wellness. I caught
Yes.
something on your website about a
Uh-huh.
partnership that you're working on for around wellness. You want to
Yes,
take
I
2 minutes before we
am.
close this episode out and
Sure.
share that?
Yes. So this is something I'm really excited about. So there's the 8 Dimensions of Wellness from SAMHSA. I really, really love. And, the way it's advertised is really focused on recovery spaces. However, I love it. So I use it in my trainings all the time because I think it's just important conversation about balance in life. And I've recently had an opportunity to collaborate with a yoga instructor. And this just came out of nowhere. A young lady, she was talking to me about, she's a yoga instructor and she's interested in social justice. She actually takes a trauma-informed approach to yoga practice. And she has this whole thing. She's very passionate about yoga, not just being, this kind of like exercise that, the culture around it sometimes. And she was like, yoga is a spiritual practice, truly, first. It's not about exercise. And so she's actually embodied this concept around social justice and diversity, equity, inclusion, and how to use yoga to relieve stress and trauma that we hold in the body. And I was just fascinated by what she was talking about. And so one day we were just talking and she mentioned that there were 8 limbs of yoga and I don't know anything about yoga. Okay. And I was telling her about the 8 Dimensions of Wellness program and how I really love it. And, having it be something that's a part of like a workplace wellness initiative. And we were like, well, why don't we pair the 8 Dimensions of Wellness with the 8 limbs of yoga and do a joint workplace wellness program? And that's how that came about. Yeah. So it's super exciting. So each session, it's 8 sessions. Each session is half didactic with what is the dimension of wellness we're focusing on, and then what is the yoga pose with that. So it's really cool. I'm excited about it.
Ooh, yes. So listeners, I'll put a link in the show notes directly to that because I want to know more. I am a fan of the 8 Dimensions of Wellness, and I feel as though the pandemic has made us all start paying attention to wellness and total wellness and well-being. To the time is right, and yeah, the 8 Dimensions of Wellness. We should all be looking to our lives with that lens and seeing how we can really find the right amount. That I was going to say balance, but I actually was reading something the other day that you'll never actually really achieve true balance in life, but it's about harmony with life. Yes.
Which goes with our musical theme days. So I'm so
Right.
glad you said that. It's true. It is about harmony.
Right.
Thank you for that correction. It is about harmony, actually.
Yeah, because that's how you can tap into and really lean into your passion in all your areas of life and having that clear picture, that perfect harmony. Oh,
Yeah. How beautiful.
yes.
I love it. I love it.
This has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. We're going to have more of these, whether you want to or not. I'm
always happy to chat with you, Dave.
I'm feeling inspired. I'm feeling motivated, and just my heart is happy thinking about the music that you are creating with folks and for this world. So thank you for coming on the podcast. Thank you for having me. Being who you are and doing what you do.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thanks for joining us. That concludes this episode. Thank you all for not only taking time to listen, but your continued work to make our region safe, healthy, and drug-free. If you'd like to know what training we have coming up, check out our website at pttcnetwork.org. And remember, prevention is better together, and together we are stronger.